Hong Kong protests recently made headlines, right? How has this impacted the demand of real estate in Hong Kong? I'm sure the floor is really keen to hear more about the capital outflow into other APAC countries, and is the demand being met by the supply in those countries?
All right. So thanks, SueChi. As mentioned, at least I'm safe. I arrived here finally. So no worries. I think Hong Kong, although maybe you see the pictures or some footage from TV news, seems scary, right? I'm not sure whether you feel the same, right? But actually, I think it's still all right as a Hong Konger, because I think the protesters, they do the things on the streets only in some major areas. So actually, I don't think it affects the whole Hong Kong to a certain extent yet. Although I think in these few days, just starting from this Monday, the situation becomes worse. I can say that it's still quite uncertain about the next few days or next few weeks, how the situation will become. So to answer your question, I think maybe I will divide it into commercial real estate and residential real estate first. So regarding commercial real estate, I think the Hong Kong situation really makes, especially the retail sector, become worse. Some of the protesting areas actually happen in the downtown area like Mong Kok, Tsim Sha Tsui, or Admiralty in Hong Kong Island. So and also the metro system basically is asked to be stopped or end, say from 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. So you can imagine it affects a lot about, say, the retail shops, especially those for restaurants. For example, Hong Kongers basically like to eat supper. So now they need to go home because they don't have, the metro trains to send them home after, say, 10 p.m. So it affects a lot on the retail side, I can say. So according to some statistics, I think maybe 30% or even 40% of the restaurants are actually facing difficulties. So they may need to close in the coming few months. So it affects a lot on the rental level, at least for those retail shops, street shops. Regarding malls, I think in the past few days, if you see from the news, you can also observe that there are protesters going inside the malls. Some luxury malls, if you've been in Hong Kong, you should know about Pacific Place, right? You know about Festival Walk, which is grade A, which is a luxury mall selling, LV, selling Dior, Chanel, right? But they, I think starting from these days, is also be affected as well. So regarding the retail real estate, I'm quite pessimistic. Regarding office, I think so far, as I know, or from my observation, I still think the companies are willing to stay in Hong Kong, especially for those foreign companies, because I think Hong Kong is still regarded as the financial hub in the Asia-Pac region. It's not easy to be replaced by Shanghai or Singapore, to be honest. So I think the situation for office real estate is still fine, okay? But for residential real estate, answering a question about the capital outflow, honestly, I observe, because I'm also in the capital market, in the corporate financing field as well, except PropTech. I know that many of our counterparts, our clients, have already arranged the capital outflow starting from a few months ago. I think most of them are choosing Singapore or even other countries. They will try to invest in some real estate projects, especially in Southeast Asia. So Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, even Thailand, I think are the hotspots for those investors as well. So the capital outflow, I foresee will still keep on, and given the uncertain situation, I think the amount will become more and more. And you guys should know about the actual capital in Hong Kong is regarded as offshore to the mainland Chinese. So that means the capital of mainland Chinese also going out from Hong Kong to Singapore or other countries. Not only through real estate projects, but maybe through cryptocurrencies as well. So this is something happening now. But for residential real estate, I think Hong Kongers, now we consider, say, to have one more identities or citizenship in other countries. Say a hot topic is MM2H program in Malaysia. But basically, most of the Hong Kongers trying to get the MM2H or involved in the MM2H scheme, I think they still prefer living in Hong Kong, but started to invest in KL, for example, or Penang or JB, in order to get one more, like a safety net for the Hong Kongers. So for the hard demand, say, for example, for the residential in Hong Kong, it's still all right, but they will try to invest something more in the Southeast Asian countries for the residential. Yeah.
Thanks, Leo. For the benefit of everyone, MM2H, I think is Malaysia, my second home. Yeah. I think Marciano, having just come back from Hong Kong, perhaps it's good for you to share with the rest, right? From an international marketing perspective and echoing really what Leo had just shared, how do the developers or agents stick to this shift of foreign buyers, or how does it look like today in terms of project development, in terms of residential in a place like Hong Kong today?
I think I will start at the beginning, how this international project marketing has been leveraged in the past 5 years. So 5 years ago, we saw that the infrastructure and tourism numbers in Thailand were growing in a better way. So Thailand developers started to promote their projects mainly to mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. And that went on by making joint ventures or B2B activities. What I've seen in the last month in Macau and in Chim Sa Choy as well is that many of the Hong Kong buyers are window shopping. There are 30 projects a weekend in Hong Kong now, right? So you go from one hotel to another to look what are the possibilities. And even for Malaysian projects, you have a project in KL, a project in Iskandar, and they're just looking around what is possible. So actually the transactional process will not take place yet. And I agree, Malaysia was in the top demand this year. If it comes to Thailand properties in particular, we see a gap. There is no ecosystem. Bangkok is not a buy-to-let environment, and it will never will be, right? The ecosystem is broken. Many developers have chosen to set up a subsidiary to do the rental and the resale schemes for the buyers. Well, the rental is a 1 year, a 2 year, right? With some here and there, some consequences. And it cannot be done on a short-term basis. This is very significant for the real estate market. If you talk now with the clients we had 2016, 2017 in China, in Macau, in Hong Kong, in Jakarta, in Yangon, in South Africa, in Los Angeles, who bought Thailand real estate, they acknowledge one thing, is that there is no buy-to-let environment. It's very hard to find a tenant. And the second thing is, the product that I have bought back then was probably by a joint venture with an agent. And this agent has, I'm sorry for the developers that are here today, the prices were a little bit artificial. And we know that because the Chinese agents and the Chinese-speaking agents, the Malaysians, Singaporeans, they will not go for less than 8% or 10% in the market, right? And this has created a gap in the residential scene. Yesterday night, I came back from Delhi. We started a large strategic initiative to promote Thailand real estate in India, and we do this to a little bit higher level. We go to the Oberoi, to the Lodi, where we sit with the lawyers, we sit with the members of the Supreme Court who are willing to invest in Thailand. But this is not the mass market we are looking at today, right? The question I get in Hong Kong, in Yangon, in Singapore is there an oversupply in Bangkok? Well, it's not fair to say that there is an overall oversupply, but there is clustered oversupply. That is true, right? And that is something that people have to acknowledge. It's not that it's not a good or bad destination to invest. You have to make the right choices in which area there is a lower supply and reasonable demand.
So, Marciano, may you share how DMRD copes with the demand of the market, especially with more residential properties coming up everywhere? Yeah. Or what are some of the differentiating factors of one property against another that attract the foreign buyers, right?
So we come back to the buy-to-let concept, right? We have seen this year that many of the foreign developers, also the local Thais, are looking for managed residences, in particular hotel managed residences. So it's under the Condominium Act. You get a freehold ownership, but the property is managed by a hospitality operator or a hotel brand that stands behind it. So that makes perfect sense because it's an ecosystem that is around. The shift of buyers, to come back on the previous question, we see that many of the developers are stuck in the Chinese-speaking countries. And for some reason, they're not shifting. So I was one of the first that went to India in 2016-17 to promote Thailand. We're now shifting to Kathmandu, to Bhutan, to Dhaka. There's a lot of money in Dhaka. Nobody is following me, but the developers are now acknowledging that for international project marketing, it's an ever-evolving nature. You have to adapt to the market. I remember back in the days that we had the Chinese in Australia buying Bangkok property. Forget about it. The Aussie dollar is already down. Shifting, I think what developers have to do is they have to learn also from us on the ground what the market is asking for. And I'm so a bit sad to see that everybody is following each other, right? You are building in Ram Kam Heng, I'm going to build in Ram Kam Heng, and he's going to build in Ram Kam Heng, but there is no demand, you know? And they think, oh yes, we have the largest university in the kingdom standing in Ram Kam Heng, 500,000 students. But please note that these students cannot afford the rental rate that you are asking for these new developments. So who's going to rent it from you? You know, so the cluster supply is there. And I have spoken with many agencies, even with the Board of Investment, with real estate associations. It's still I don't know, it's still like a question mark, how we going to do something about the supply that's coming in. Now, there are very good developers coming in. There's one developer that came up with a concept to apply serviced apartments or serviced residences by applying a license for a majority of the units. So those projects work well. And hotel managed residences, I believe, are the future, not only for Thailand. We see them in Vietnam. We see them coming up in Yangon. I think that is what the consumer now is looking for.
Thanks, Marciano. I think it's interesting that you brought up about some of the Indo-China countries, right? So I think Rong, the question for you is, can you share with us about the situation in terms of the residential and hospitality sectors in places like Myanmar and Thailand?
Okay. I think it's very interesting lead on from what Marciano has been talking about. Number one, I guess the key points I picked up from it, which I can elaborate on. The first one is the Thai market. When it comes to the supply, there is this local and there is an international kind of market. So when it comes to our work, when we design, we sort of have to understand that we need to be a bit more cosmopolitan. We need to cater to the taste of the international market and of the local market. And that feeds into the sort of facilities that or that developers would use as their unique selling points in their projects. So, for example, I like what Marciano said about this sort of growth in terms of hotel managed residences, service residences, and that's when we are seeing this sort of synergy in terms of design, whether from architectural or interior and landscape, to create this sort of environments, even for a residential market, that's influenced by hospitality. So within some of the developments in Bangkok, you see nowadays you get for facilities, you get co-working space, grand lobby, spa, kids club, salon. So you get a very, very kind of good mix of facilities within these developments in order to attract that kind of market. In order also in a way to justify that kind of price that you're going to sort of ask for from the buyers. And that is one of the sort of supply side challenges, because everybody's doing this now. So everyone's got to try to innovate and differentiate. And it's turning into this, for Thailand itself, is turning into something that's, I think, quite interesting, because it becomes very lifestyle. Every development sort of has to be able to be self-sufficient in that sense, to be able to cater to living, to relaxation, to enjoyment. And even in terms of being able to work in place or live in place. And I think that's one of the sort of key driving trends in terms of the supply for residential and hospitality developments in Thailand. Come to Myanmar. Myanmar is a very interesting country. The infrastructure is not so well developed, but for the Burmese people, they enjoy these very close ties with Singapore, with Thailand, and they see these countries as sort of like examples that they can emulate, that they want to enjoy the same sort of standard of living and lifestyle. But in Myanmar, the supply side issue is more in terms of financing that's being made available, or can be made available to the middle class. So the interest rates are still generally very high in Myanmar, and that limits the sort of demand, especially for condominium in Myanmar, to the mid-tier of the market. So even if you had all these facilities, the issue is actually more fundamental than that. It's actually financing. But for the upper tier of the market in Yangon, what we are seeing, or what I've observed, is that there is this growth in terms of the landed property market in Yangon. But one of the sort of factors to that is actually sort of finding a good location in Yangon, because the city is not well planned. Infrastructure is not so well developed. And also at the same time, the kind of land plots that you have are not very big. You usually have to go through this painful acquisition process with all the neighbors and try to cobble together a few plots to make the land big enough and viable enough if you want to make a development that's sizable for your return. The other interesting trend about Myanmar is that we are also seeing this rise in terms of vacation homes for this upper middle level kind of market, where you have, because Myanmar's a country that's running north to south, you've got a varied landscape. The joke is that in Myanmar, they have everything, including uranium. They have mountains, they have forests, they have seas. So there is this internal market, or internal tourism market, that's also kind of driving the rise of vacation homes located in Myanmar, whether it's at near Mandalay or Inlay Lake at Kalor, where we recently also just completed the concept for a sort of small residential villa development, or even at the beach locations, Chongta, Nepali, Nuesao, or down south, Kotong, and the Miek Archipelago. So there's sort of some of the trends that are influencing the supply side.
Thanks, Chiro. Well, I think we can probably move to Malaysia, considering that the government has recently relaxed its rule for foreign buyers in the residential sector. And definitely there is abundance of supply, right? Do we see that with this new measure? Is that going to help to, really bring up the demand? Really helping to balance out the supply that they have today?
Where we have to start with is, first of all, the concept of supply and demand. What we learn at school is the simple line, supply and demand, and it's much different. It is much more, like Marciano says, the clustered approach. Certain segments of the market have oversupply, other one have shortage, and it's somewhat flawed to fundamentally say there is a supply-demand balance or not. When I look at Malaysia, we can categorize the market into, I just do it in 3 parts. When you look at the residential part, you see that home ownership is still high on the agenda of the government, and they put in place initiatives to promote this. Luxury high-rise is still emerging in the city. You see this, but you might wonder whether actually there's sufficient uptake in this. What you see more throughout Malaysia as well, there is continued investment in infrastructure, which opens up corridors of development and neighborhoods for further development. This is on the residential side, and I come back to your question on the investment and the lower of the pricing. When we look at offices, especially in KL, because here's most of my experience, you see again an oversupply or demand not really catching up with the supply. You see that concept like co-working that already has been discussed, that's been popping up. You see older buildings that have to be repurposed, or people having to think differently about spaces. Then the third category I just want to highlight is the hospitality. Also KL, a lot of hotels with low prices and good quality. And you see still more international brands coming, especially into the city center. When you put this together, it is a challenging market for developers. Prices and yields are putting down. As a result, all of the developers are looking to ways to differentiate. And here I'm taking my perspective from a sustainability perspective. NEAPOLI, or our company, works with developers and architects to see how they can make their buildings high-performing, energy efficient, and help them differentiate in this way. This differentiation is one of the key reasons why many developers and architects are interested in this. It allows them to say, my building is not just average, my building is premium, and I can justify this because I've got a certificate that justifies I got LEED Platinum or GBI Gold. And you see this in the residential part, and you see this in the office part and the hospitality as well. One interesting thing that's coming up, and I think is a new trend, in the past we have seen mostly the focus on the buildings. We were judging efficiency based on energy efficiency, water efficiency, and sustainable materials. These days, the view is slightly shifting towards the occupants. Rather than saying, I want my energy bill to be reduced and I want to be efficient, we are shifting the focus towards the occupants. We've seen the slide where we spend 80% of our time indoors, and we are trying to create or focus on creating healthy environments, making sure that the indoor air quality is healthy, there is views, and all of this relates to better productivity, happier employees, and better returns on investment. But when we circle back all the way, what is the main reason for doing this? And why is the main reason that many developers are interested in this? Because they're having a hard time purely selling their residential or their office space, and they're looking for a way to justify their prices and have to compete. And although I'm a big supporter of investing in sustainability and in wellness, but often it's still driven by the oversupply that is created. Back to your first question, is the reduction of the 1 million ringgit to the 600,000 ringgit for home ownership, is this going to change things? Of course, it's a policy that makes things easier. But it is we have to understand again, the supply and demand is not a one line that is being drawn. In certain clusters, it will make it attractive for foreign buyers to take up the ownership, but you will still have things as office space, hospitality, and other things that would still suffer from the same issues. So in this perspective, I think Malaysia also very challenging, not necessarily easy. You see that still a lot of development is ongoing, and I expect that the supply will still outstrip demand for the near future.
Thanks, Hans. I think you talk about two things that would actually, lead to my following questions. Earlier, one of our speakers, Niraj, also talked about these spaces that are disrupting the real estate industry in Asia Pacific today. So the other interesting topic is going to be then about co-living, co-working, and flexible working spaces. I mean, they are like the recent EAT demand, right? So maybe Leo, you can share with us, or Marciano, right? How this is actually changing and shaping the designs of the new spaces. Rong, probably this is something that you could probably shed some light on also.
Okay, maybe I'll just talk a bit from the design perspective for co-work or co-live kind of space. I think it's the hot topic, but probably in a city like New York, where space is at a super premium, that's something that has gained more traction compared to what we see in Southeast Asia or in the Indo-China region. For example, in Myanmar, the economy is not so sufficiently developed for it to have such a kind of a tertiary kind of level of workforce that would then be office-based and would then have grow that demand in terms of the co-working space. In Bangkok, my sensing or my observation is that it's starting to gain some traction because the density of the city is incredible. But the good thing is that there is a existing infrastructural network, and that's being expanded. So that actually makes sort of being able to work or in another location from your main office, probably something that's a little bit more convenient. But I think I'm Singaporean, but I think in Singapore this is something that might start to make better sense. For example, our office in Singapore just recently switched over to kind of what we call the hot desking or kind of co-working kind of environment. So we redid the interiors of our office. So we used to occupy 4 floors, but when we switched over to this sort of mode of working, we actually reduced the number of floors by half. So we are actually renting only 2 floors. So that sort of co-working environment can actually help to save costs for some of the sort of companies or businesses.
Thanks, Rong. I think it's interesting that you mentioned about the Ong and Ong office in Singapore. I think
you can come see it. It's quite nice.
I would also love to mention that the GLL Singapore office also moved into a smart building with a lot of smart building, technology, basically trying to make it into a high performance building. So, Marciano and Leo, do you want to add anything to that?
If it comes to co-living, the concept is not really still realized in Thailand, co-living, but co-working is booming. The last report I read, there are over 70 co-working brands in the kingdom. That's quite a lot. That's quite significant. And you not only see the small startup, we also see sizable SMEs now going into co-work spaces, 20, 30, 40, 50 staff with hot desks. And it's convenient because of the infrastructure we have here with the mass transit. So it's very convenient for clients to meet. It's very convenient for your employees to commute in the city. When it comes to the residential part, more residences are now embedding co-work facilities. And the owners are very happy because the co-work facility, you don't have to pay extra for it. It's part of the common area fee. So for them, it's an additional cost that is left out. The only thing they have to figure out is to do the business registration, but that can be done. And that makes it more flexible also. So you see more, majority of the new residential developments have that mixed-use feeling toward it, where people can work in the facility, okay, and convenience, they stay in their area, and then they can work till late, you know, it's quite convenient, yes. Most of the residential developers, they try to operate the co-working themselves, which I will not advise, because it's not just doing it yourself. I would advise them really to start to collaborating with co-work partners. That's the best.
Yeah, maybe I add some points regarding the co-working. I think co-working in the Greater China region now is quite oversupply. I mean, it's very saturated. Just like a company, a developer called Soho China. You know, I helped their IPO about 10 years ago. I think they were probably the very first real estate developer in China, bringing in the co-working concept into their commercial buildings. So they have the 3Q as their co-working brand, but recently they sold it. So because I catch up with the CFO, the CEO of Seoul China, they told me, wow, now it's very challenging in mainland China. Just like sharing bike, right? Some years ago in China, you know, the bubbles burst. There's a joke that even we don't have enough color to paint, you know, all the co-sharing bike because there's so many companies running that. So in mainland China, definitely I think co-working is saturated. Same in Hong Kong as well. Hong Kong, you know, even for some family offices, for some second generations or third generations from the rich families, they tend to do co-working because they have some properties maybe underutilized and then they just turn it into, okay, it's a co-working space. So it brings a really serious oversupply. So maybe as an investor, we need to think about it. And regarding the trend, I agree with Marciano that maybe we need to consider more about not only co-working, but also combining, say, work, live, play into a single space. Just like last week, I spoke to a hospitality guy in Hong Kong. I think hotel owners, for example, I think you guys have the most of the underutilized space that may be rented out as co-working, co-living, or even a playing space in the hospitality sector. So somehow I think the trend is also changing. Like WeWork also failed the IPO, right? Maybe it's not only because of the oversupply, but it's kind of a difference between the VC and capital market. But anyhow, it tells, right, the situation. Yeah. So maybe work, live, play is something we should focus on. Yeah.
I want to add a few extra points. I think some of you may be familiar with Gartner's hype cycle. And basically, in this hype cycle, I think co-working is one of those peak of inflated expectation. I think up to recently, the view was either with WeWorks and others that this will be the new way of working. I think there are concepts in co-working that are very good. Sharing costs, do all of these combined things. But what you see basically is you're moving to a different concept from a traditional office that is literally a building, desks, and that's it, to a place that is that has community in mind, that has services in mind, that has flexibility and productivity in mind, makes it easy to commute, make it easy to meet other people. These concepts very, very good. And I think when I think about it, this is what you will see in more and more offices. So I think the traditional offices, even the 5,000, 10,000 staff buildings, they will also start to incorporate these type of services, because it's the services and the concept what the people want, what makes them more productive, what makes them come to work and makes them enjoy being there. How this would work exactly with the co-working and how this model will develop, I think there will be a point in time where we start thinking, oh, this co-working, that was a thing of the past, but then I'm sure that we will finds its footing, and then we will develop from there. But for today, I think it's still on this peak of inflation where we believe that this is the holy grail and the traditional office will not be existing anymore. And I think that's not completely correct.
Thank you. Okay, Leo, do you want to share something about PropTech? I mean, the way that it is really gradually revolutionizing the global real estate industry today.
Okay, all right. I think, first of all, PropTech is just a buzzword, okay? So don't care much about the true definition of it. No matter what kind of technologies or even business model innovation. So PropTech is not necessary to be techy. So like co-working is also regarded as PropTech as well. So I think regarding the topics, the theme of our discussion about supply and demand, I observe that, say, PropTech, maybe on the floor, you guys should also try to think about how data in real estate can really help, say, to satisfy the customers or even help for the project marketing, right? Because data in real estate industry, I think, is the most difficult to get. Compared with other industries, like health industry, if you wear a smartwatch, if you wear a Fitbit, I think the operators can get your data very easily. But regarding the real estate data, it's always a pain point, because I don't think the landlords will share much about their data to others, with the others. So nowadays, I think in the PropTech field, there are many companies, especially from Europe, from the US, are working very hard in standardizing the data. Because without data, AI can't work. So personally, I think AI is very powerful in the whole real estate and construction value chain. Because with enough amount of data, AI can run different scenarios. So it can help the real estate investors, it can help the developers, it can help the agents, even the constructors, the builders, to make the real estate more efficient. Because as an economics student, I think I strongly believe that the real estate problem is all about transaction cost to make it not liquid enough. So regarding PropTech, I think, yeah, maybe data, analytics, AI should be under the spotlight in the coming years. Yeah.
Thanks, Leo. Hans, you talk about high performance buildings, right? Do you see the demand growing year on year in a market like Asia?
So yes, it does grow. And it goes back to the point I made earlier about the need for differentiation. So there is an increase in demand. But if I look at Malaysia specifically and we look at high performance buildings, and let's say that we say a high performing building is one that significantly reduces their energy consumption, or classify them as a green building. Only 2% of the buildings in Malaysia are yet green buildings. So when we look at, back to one of the slides earlier, right? So CO2 emissions or carbon emission, the built environment of buildings contribute 40%. And green buildings help reduce this. But we are still only doing in Malaysia than 2%. I think Singapore is slightly different, where it's mandated by the government, but even in places as in the US and others, it are clusters and big cities where there is an increase of those buildings. But outside, not so much yet. And I agree with the previous point on AI and measuring. If you want to make a difference and if you want to create a high-performing building, it doesn't necessarily have to be certified, but you have to start looking at the data. The data is often there, but it is not being used. Many times developers come to me and say, I've got this data, but I'm just lost. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to start analyzing it. We also use AI, machine learning, and these type of things to help people make sense of this data. This is something that is relatively new, and more interest is there because it allows people to make better decisions, more informed decisions, and faster decisions. And with cycles shortening, the need for better and quicker decisions is something that is needed. So when I look at technology, data, and integration, you see that is coming up quite quickly.
Marciano, would you like to add something?
I want to congratulate Malaysia with the 2%. In Thailand, it's probably 0.0001%. I can remember only two residential buildings I'm talking about that are going in that pace. Commercial, something else. But I agree just in general regarding data-driven decision makings. What here, there are 2 developers in Thailand now that are trying to apply that data into how energy can be saved. It's very holistic, right? It's a holistic approach. But they can measure which common areas and facilities are used less than the others. So I think, the first step is a good step, right? You need to start somewhere because nobody else is doing it here. And from there, maybe we can learn from our brothers and sisters in Malaysia and Singapore in those residential projects, how to take it to the next step.
Thanks a lot, Marciano. I think we are almost coming to a close of this panel discussion, but it's also equally important to touch on a final point. So Rong, I think we should talk about materials management. I think this is the whole part of supply chain, how it affects the project planning and control, right? Materials represent a major expense in construction, so minimizing the cost, and also managing within the budget is very, very important. So can you share some of the measures in the industry to manage or curb the avoidable costs or any delay in project completion?
Well, in materials or construction, they form typically in a development, a majority of the cost that the developer has to upfront in order to gain his return. So I can contrast, I guess, between a emerging economy, Yangon, and a very developed economy like Bangkok. I think in Bangkok, this construction procurement is pretty much in a very highly and advanced state. It's just probably like, as Marciano said, that as you adopt new technologies or green technologies and you embed that into your construction costs, the dynamic might change. So the developers might have to go, there will be a period of time where they will have to understand the sort of the change in the cost. Other than that, if you're based on the conventional way of constructing right now, I think in Bangkok the cost is relatively stable. That means you're able to know how you can drive down your costs in terms of importing materials from cheaper sources, from China or from other countries. Contrast that to Yangon. In Yangon, the sort of, for the developer, the risk is more than just the cost of importing goods. You don't have a industry that's locally developed to be able to give you the basic construction materials such as cement, brick, good quality, and steel. So therefore, in this sort of basic conventional materials, you have to import, and that then already starts to drive up your costs. The other issue for materials procurement, let's say for a country like Yangon or the Myanmar, is in terms of the currency. So as the local currency weakens against the US dollar, it also becomes more expensive for the developer to sort of import materials for his projects.
Thanks a lot, Rong.